And we're live. We're live, guys. Welcome to this post-election episode of Good Morning Liberty, Wednesday morning, November the 7th, 2018. My name is Michael Boldin, broadcasting to you live, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here on the West Coast from the 10th Amendment Center via YouTube. So thank you so much for tuning in to join me today. I really appreciate you spending some time with me. I know there's been a lot of political hype and political football out there, so we're going to talk about a few things that I think are interesting. Wins for decentralization, wins for the 10th Amendment, wins for liberty, in spite of the fact that we can't trust anyone in Washington, D.C. to limit their own power. I do want to say hi to a couple people out in the chat room. Dakota Keeler. Awesome. Good to see you. Yes, we're going to cover Michigan shortly, and Justin Bayola. And for those of you who are tuning in and listening just through our audio, our podcast version now, we do a live broadcast every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, except this week, Friday the 9th. I'm traveling to Dallas, Texas, to speak at an event hosted by the Abbeville Institute. So for those of you who join me on YouTube, I will do my best to have another video posted, a pre-recorded one, just a short, one of our regular weekly videos that I think you'll find is pretty interesting. Hi to Truth Freeze out in the chat, Joseph Standridge, and of course, whether you're watching us live right now or you're watching in the archives or you're just listening, wherever you're coming across this show, please smash the like button whatever channel you see it on, leave some comments, and of course, share the link. Helps us spread the word. It helps us get more listeners, more viewers. And of course, thank you so much for doing that. I do also want to mention that for those of you who are interested in following all the different channels we post on, the best place to kind of just keep in touch with what's going on is 10thamendmentcenter.com/Good Morning Liberty. That place, that's where you're going to see on the TAC blog, you're going to see all of the episodes. You can go through all of them in the past. 10thamendmentcenter.com/Good Morning Liberty. We embed the YouTube video so you can see the previously recorded live stream. And in some of our most recent ones, once we converted to an audio podcast, you'll see an audio player. You'll see links to subscribe on iTunes and on Google, and eventually we'll get on Stitcher and elsewhere. But you'll also see where we post to BitChute, Brighteon.com, and now Keyport.tv. These are other video platforms that are not YouTube. So anyways, let's get into the interesting stories of the day. And I think, of course, everyone's talking about the Democrats flipped the House, and the Republicans, I don't know where they are in the Senate. I think they held on. Ted Cruz, I know, won, maybe because he voted to keep funding Obamacare. Some of the socialists that would have voted for his opponent decided to vote for him. So Mad Sai says, congratulations on surviving another election, everybody. Yeah, this is when the real stuff happens. Now, today, after the voting. Because as we can see, year in and year out, no matter who gets elected to Washington, D.C., federal power continues to grow. They continue to spy on us more. They continue to do more gun control. They continue to spend more money. They continue to engage in more unconstitutional wars. They continue to do more and more and more. And it really is up to us to start advancing liberty without waiting for federal permission. And on Monday's show, I covered James Madison's advice, his 4-step program to defeating federal programs without waiting for the federal government to basically give up their own power. And one of the primary ways that he recommended doing that was through disobedience on a state and an individual level and a refusal to cooperate with officers of the union. And the first article that I want to cover today, the first report that we covered, is, I don't know, if you're watching the news and if you see anything outside of they flip the House, the Democrats flip the House blue, if you're paying attention to anything outside of that, you may have heard that a number of states had ballot measures on weed. And of all places, even with the ramp up, the threats from the Republicans and Jeff Sessions, we've now had, while Trump has been in office, the reddest of the red states are taking action to legalize marijuana despite a full federal prohibition. Legalize, and in some places it's for limited medical purposes. In other places, like Michigan, California, Colorado, and elsewhere, it's for full recreational, like alcohol. But in 2017, West Virginia became state number 30. Earlier this year, Utah, with a very limited program, became state number 31. Over the summer, Oklahoma became state number 32. And yesterday, Missouri, of all places, became the 33rd state to legalize a product and help create a market for a product that every branch of the federal government tells us is illegal. Now, mind you, even the Supreme Court has said that these state laws don't do anything to affect federal law. In a case called Gonzalez versus Raich in 2005, the Supreme Court held, under the great conservative leadership of Antonin Scalia, that if you grow 6 plants in your backyard, you never buy or sell those plants, you consume them in your own home, and you never transport them across state lines, somehow this qualifies under the Interstate Commerce Clause to be controlled, regulated, and completely banned by the federal government as they decide. And now, for those who might think that Scalia just made one bad political choice on that, maybe that was, but it was a really bad one, because supporters of Obamacare, in the case, the NFIB versus Sebelius, leaned heavily on Scalia's arguments, the conservative arguments, to nationalize prohibition over a plant in order to support their case, which won on Obamacare. Woodsider, hi in the chat. Truth Freeze. Great to see you all here. So let's talk a little bit about Missouri. So it was Amendment 2, which passed by a huge margin, 64-36. And this was at the time when I was updating the report that Mike Meharry helped me put together. It was about 50% reporting. It could be even higher now. It could be less. But either way, it's a pretty huge margin. A lot of these passed by much closer numbers. So what's interesting about the Missouri bill, here in California, where this whole process started back in 1996, when 3 presidents came out to our state the year before or during that year and said, one current one, that was Bill Clinton, and then 2 previous ones, came to lobby against medical marijuana in California. And even though there was a lot of the reefer madness saying the terrorists will win, children are going to die in the streets, there's going to be violence and crime and organized and cartels and all these crazy things, which turned out to be false, one of the number one things that they pushed on us was that you can't do this. The Supremacy Clause says you're not allowed to do this. Federal law says marijuana is illegal. And, you know, if you're going to vote on this, you're wasting a lot of money just on the ballot. You're wasting a lot of money on the campaigns. And then you're going to waste a lot of money because you are guaranteed going to lose in a federal lawsuit, and we're going to shut you down. And you can't do anything about that. Well, we all know how that marketing campaign worked out, and people in California voted anyways. But what the earliest states did, and some of them still do this today, when they defy Washington, D.C. on marijuana, they tend to have the government get involved on a state level in a very heavy way, saying, well, in a doctor-patient relationship, they tell the doctor what areas the doctor can recommend this plant for, what type of treatments, glaucoma, PTSD, things like that. So it's very helpful for military veterans who've been in battle, places like Afghanistan, tour after tour after tour. A lot of doctors have helped veterans by recommending medical marijuana for their PTSD, for example, or CBD oil, for example, which helps reduce anxiety but does not have the psychoactive THC in it. But what's interesting about the people of Missouri, and the same thing happened in Oklahoma over the summer, was that they took the government out of that equation completely. So it's a big advance in how it's being approached as the years go by. Doctors will be able to recommend medical cannabis for any condition they see fit. There is no specific list of qualifying disorders. None. The same thing happened in Oklahoma. And I think the progress, the positive thing here is that as the years go on, the people who are pushing the measures are pushing them to have less and less and less government control, even on a state or local level over time. So I think we're going to see even more of that going forward. So doctors can recommend medical marijuana for whatever reason they see fit for their patient. Could be anxiety, could be eating disorder, could be cancer, could be anything. It's none of our business. Politicians don't know crap about this stuff. Why would we trust them? So it requires no less than 24 dispensaries in each congressional district. And then there's a 4% sales tax, which is much lower than what we see here in places like California. And that funds the program itself, supposedly, and the rest is going to go to the Missouri Veterans Commission. It'll be interesting to see if the marijuana tax in Missouri does more to help veterans than the Federal Veterans Administration. Now, the important point to note here is that all of this is illegal under federal law. It's illegal. The federal government is going to lock people up, and every time a single state takes action to undermine it, it makes it more difficult and more impossible for the federal government to do anything about it. And so this, in practice and effect, is nullifying the federal prohibition on marijuana. They have it on the books in Washington, D.C. The DEA says it's a Schedule I drug. There's a UN treaty that says the United States can't legalize it. The executive branch with Jeff Sessions say he's going to shut it down. The Supreme Court says they're going to stop it. But this great example shows that the people can and will do it anyways. Now, for those who want more liberty on a state level, it's incumbent upon them to improve on it over time on a state-by-state level. And I will probably cover this in a future episode, but in Colorado, we see this happening more and more. They're doing things like tax holidays, they're reducing the amount of taxes, they're making it more difficult for the legislature to restrict what qualifies as hemp and things like that. So build upon this. More freedom is better than people being in jail. And we know that this is working. The interesting part, and I mentioned the Clinton administration, a lot of people think that this slowed down or stopped under Obama. But this is a total propaganda piece. The Clinton administration, in 4 years after California passed Proposition 215, the Compassionate Use Act, conducted about 50 raids to try to stop medical marijuana from going anywhere. Then the Bush administration came in, and over their 2 terms, they conducted 200 raids. And now everybody thinks that Obama backed off, he was a pothead, and this is just propaganda from both sides of the political spectrum. Republicans like it because then they can hammer on Obama as being lawless, doesn't follow the rules, executive order type of guy. And the left, the Democrats, love this because it makes him look like he's compassionate. But it's a total lie because his administration conducted 270 raids in just his first 4 years, which is more than Bush and Clinton combined over 12 years. So Obama was the worst in history. And despite that, we had 7 states at the end of the Clinton administration that had legalized marijuana for one purpose or another. And then the next level, after the Bush administration, we had 13. And then from there, after Obama ramped it up, we had 29. And so now we're up to 33, and it'll be interesting to see how many states continue to do this. Back in 2015, I put out a video in one of our Nullification video series, and I basically said, as long as this keeps happening, as long as people keep moving things forward, the market keeps growing, sooner or later the feds are going to have to pretend that they backed off just to save face and make it look like they're the ones that are setting people free. And I think that's how it's playing out right now. So that really is what I wanted to cover on, and I actually put that quote here. It's only a matter of time before they overwhelm federal enforcement capabilities completely, and the feds will have to act like they've decided to drop the issue just to save face. So this is absolutely a big step forward. We now have 33 states. Some of the reddest of the red states are definitely taking steps forward to reject this unconstitutional ban on a plant. And we're going to see more and more in the future. We'd like to see this applied to other issues as well. And we've been arguing this for many years, and we've been building this entire movement behind this idea that, like, look, everyone said that no one could defy Washington, D.C. on weed. We've been told for years that state by state, the feds will just come in and shut it down. In 2013, just before Amendment 64 for Colorado legalized recreational weed went into effect. That was January of 2014. Just 6 weeks before that went into effect, the Obama administration, in partnership with local law enforcement, conducted the largest series of marijuana raids, prohibition raids, in Colorado history. This was to send a warning shot across the bow. Don't do anything about this. You can't do this. You should really reconsider what you're going to try to do. Scare people off. And we were told by many people, look, man, this whole legalization thing, it's not going to work. The feds can come in and shut it down whenever they want. But this is bull, because we know how it played out after that. And we've actually run the numbers of the DEA budget, and we also know how much it costs approximately to do an investigation, a raid, and a prosecution. And it would take about 40 to 50% of the DEA's annual budget, if they could even pull this off logistically, to shut down the marijuana industry in Los Angeles alone. That doesn't count Denver, it doesn't count Boston, it doesn't count Detroit, it doesn't count Portland, Seattle, Anchorage, Alaska, San Diego, none of it. So this is really, we're watching before our eyes a process where states and individuals are taking action to undermine Washington, D.C., even though every branch of the federal government is lined up against them. So, as I was saying, we like to see this happen in other things, and we've been working very hard to take these exact type of processes and apply it to other things. And one that I thought was interesting is a series of what people are calling gun rights sanctuary ordinances that were introduced in 10 counties around Oregon. 8 of them passed yesterday. 8. Voters in 8 Oregon counties have passed ballot measures that set the stage to create what supporters call gun rights sanctuary counties. Second Amendment preservation ordinances on the ballot passed in 8 of 10 counties today. They create a mechanism to guarantee that no county funds will be used to enforce gun laws that are believed to violate the Second Amendment, including registration rules and limitations on semi-automatic weapons and ammunition. It's not as far along as what has been happening on marijuana. So what happens on marijuana, even with these, and I know like Robert Sanderson is talking about how this is no good, he voted against it because there's a tax. But if we're focusing on the greatest threat to our liberty, which is Washington, D.C., and mind you, even the worst problems on a state or a local level are actually funded by Washington, D.C. So most marijuana enforcement, most gun control enforcement, these are all handled by the state or local level. We know from FBI statistics on weed, for example, that 99 out of 100, 99% of marijuana prohibition enforcement actions are handled under state law rather than federal. So if we're talking about taking the state out of the way on a vast majority of things, then it's sweeping away the vast majority of the reason for 99% of the prohibition. And the same thing goes for ATF enforcement, federal gun control. Most of the gun control actions are actually done by state or local law enforcement. So while the marijuana programs are facilitated by these state laws, this is a very positive step where it creates a mechanism on a county-by-county basis to basically opt out of helping enforce federal gun control. And in the Oregon ones, which I think is going to actually make it a little bit more logistically difficult, they're also addressing, which I think they should, they're also addressing state gun control, which is really bad in coming out of the capital of, I don't even know the capital of Oregon. So voters in Douglas County, for example, passed Measure 10-165 by an overwhelming margin of 73 to 27%. It would require the sheriff to determine whether any federal, state, or local laws and regulations relating to firearms, firearms accessories, or ammunition violate the U.S. or Oregon constitutions. Any law or regulation the sheriff deemed unconstitutional would be unenforceable in the county. A couple of things. First of all, the sheriff already has the right and the duty to not enforce unconstitutional actions. Unfortunately, most sheriffs don't know this, And most sheriffs are afraid to do it even when they do know this. So passage of these ordinances in now 8 counties throughout Oregon is basically giving these sheriffs what I would call either political or legal cover to start doing what they're supposed to do. The question is, I don't know the quality of these sheriffs. I don't know if they're good. I've been told by Rob Taylor and some other activists in Oregon that they have a good handful of them that are really on board, that they know personally, that are against all gun control, as they should be. But they're basically afraid in the status quo of doing something. I don't know. So these ordinances now say, look, it is the duty, and it actually in the Douglas County ordinance that passed yesterday by 73% to 27%, it specifically says it shall be the duty of the sheriff. Not he has an option, not he can, or maybe, but it shall be the duty of the sheriff to determine if there are any unconstitutional gun control measures. So let's say the sheriff in Douglas County, Oregon decides, because now it's law that he has to do this, and he doesn't make a determination that any gun control measure violates the state or federal constitutions. Nothing in practice in effect today. Well, that's going to tell these gun rights supporters who are clearly pretty organized in that county that sheriff is on board with everything that's on the books today. That's the National Firearms Act of 1934, the Gun Control Act of 68, the amendments of 86, Undetectable Firearms Act of 88, the NICS system, all of this. That's telling them that nothing's unconstitutional, and anything coming out on the state level, this is all fine too. Nothing violates the state or federal constitution. So it's putting pressure on the sheriffs, which I think is important because they haven't really backed off on enforcement of these gun control measures. It puts pressure on them to take a public stand. And then as soon, and this is how it works, as soon as they make a determination that something is viewed under the opinion of the sheriff's office as unconstitutional, then the county will no longer provide any resources. It will prohibit the county from authorizing the use of funds, resources, employees, agencies, contractors, buildings, detention centers, or offices for the purpose of enforcing such laws. And if you remember, or if you watched or listened to the show on Monday, James Madison specifically told us that if you want to undermine federal programs, if you want to do that, the number one thing you should do. Well, he didn't say number one. There's 4 things, and I've put a lot of pressure on it. So maybe it's me saying it's the number one. But there are 4 things that should be done. And of the 4 things that should be done, Madison says refuse to cooperate with officers of the union. Just stop participating in their programs, because doing so in a number of states simultaneously, or we could say in a number of counties simultaneously, cities, as we've seen with immigration sanctuary cities, these clearly do the job. Otherwise, no one would be complaining about them. If not participating in federal immigration enforcement did not affect federal immigration enforcement, this wouldn't be a debate. So clearly, this does undermine federal programs, whether you agree with that or not. And that's what I think is being recognized in Oregon. They're seeing what happens. It was the first state in the country with an immigration sanctuary state law, and these guys got the idea. I don't know if it was from us. I know they've referenced our work quite a bit, but we've been pushing people to look at that model and apply it to the right to keep and bear arms, to healthcare freedom, to basically everything across the board. And if James Madison's telling us that withdrawing support, disobeying, and refusing to cooperate with officers of the union will create a situation, quote, the government would hardly be willing to encounter at a time when the federal government was so small it did almost nothing, then we know today when the government on the federal level is partnered with the states on most federal programs. Most federal programs are a partnership in enforcement between states and feds. That federal programs are like, they're screwed when half the team quits. If there's 2 sides working on something and one side says we're done, that's not going to be a very effective enforcement strategy. So we had 8 counties take the first step to create the mechanism to create political pressure on the sheriff to stop enforcing, to at least make a determination. And if the sheriff makes this determination, the entire county stops participating using any resource. Can you imagine? Not even the county jail can be used. And most counties have agreements with the ATF, the DEA, I would bet even the EPA and the FDA to house people arrested by federal agents. So it makes it far more difficult to do that. We have Baker County, Columbia, Klamath, Lake, Lynn, Umatilla, and Union County. The closest was in Lynn, where it was 50 to 49%, and there was also a 52 to 48. But a win is a win. People worked extremely hard to get the job done. And so we should give them a kudos, a pat on the back, and encourage them to keep pushing forward to get the job done. 2 counties voted no. Jackson County rejected their measure 43 to 57, and Lincoln County rejected theirs 36 to 64. So we're very encouraged by this result. It's a great report from Mike Meharry. If you're watching live on YouTube, all these links should already be in the show notes, thanks to a recommendation from Idamon last week. And of course, if you're going to 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty, you'll find all of our episodes with all the show notes through them. Another interesting thing that passed yesterday was out in New Hampshire. Live Free or Die, the Free State. A privacy amendment known as Question Number 2. Well, let me just read it to you. This is pure New Hampshire. An individual's right to live free from governmental intrusion in private or personal information is natural, essential, and inherent. It wasn't just, oh, you have a right to privacy, or you have a right to be free from government interference unless the government can present a compelling case. That's how most laws are actually organized on surveillance. This is talking about your natural right to be free from government intrusion. Natural rights. That's the basis of all of this. We have a natural right to keep and bear arms. We have a natural right to choose what plant we're going to grow in our backyards. And government at all levels does interfere with it. So it's positive when we undermine any level of government's ability to continue doing that. So question 2 says an individual's right to live free from governmental intrusion in private or personal information is natural, essential, and inherent. And what did that pass by? It wasn't 50 to 49. It was 80% to 20%. And when we posted this on Facebook yesterday, somebody had commented, oh man, I can't believe 20% of the people are that dumb. And I replied as a comment for the 10th Amendment Center, pointing out that if this were to have come up right after September 11th, after the World Trade Center situation, I think it would have lost the total other way around. So there's been a ton of progress in the fact that only 20% does not recognize this natural right. That's very positive and very good. But it has a practical effect. It's not just a statement. Mike Meharry reports this. Addition of this language to the New Hampshire Bill of Rights bars the state from infringing on an individual's right to privacy, their natural right to privacy, mind you, and creates a legal framework to protect personal information, including digital data, from the prying eyes of government. Passage of the amendment establishes the right to privacy as the default setting in the state of New Hampshire. Default, not the other way around. The government can do whatever they want, and maybe we can come up with some restrictions. Now, according to the ACLU, it requires that the government obtain a judicial warrant supported by probable cause before accessing any personal information. That will be the default going forward in New Hampshire. It also sets the foundation to help prevent law enforcement from accessing private information through third parties. And what I think is very important on this level of nullifying the surveillance state, this is a foundational step, is that when you ban local law enforcement from participating in these surveillance programs, or you restrict them to what it should be, based on a warrant, probable cause, etc., then it becomes more difficult for some federal surveillance programs to continue as well. I know everybody focuses on the NSA, but the NSA is only part of the puzzle. A lot of surveillance happens at a more granular level. They use devices known as automated license plate readers on highways. They use stingrays. These are devices that spoof cell phone towers and collect everyone's data within the range. So it tricks every cell phone to connecting to this stingray device, which will just sit, maybe it's like this big, and then it retransmits it to the cell tower. So you don't even know, but everything's being collected by this law enforcement agent in this little box. Or they use drones. Now, mind you, most of those devices are operated by state and local law enforcement without a warrant, and then they collect all that data, and then they share it with the federal government. They pass it along to the FBI, the DEA, the DHS, and or the NSA, or the CIA in some situations, I'm sure, through something known as the Information Sharing Environment, ISE, or also through fusion centers, where there are many of them throughout the country. So what's happening is the FBI, through what's called Department of Homeland Security JAG grants, I'm sorry, not the FBI, but the DHS through their grants, they're basically buying these products or handing cash and then giving it out to state and local law enforcement. Then the law enforcement uses it on a state and local level, collects all the information, sends it to Washington, D.C., and then Washington, D.C. continues to build these centralized profiles of how everybody thinks and acts and what they do and where they go and who they talk to. You could have a license plate reader sitting outside of a gun show. Well, that's how the feds can close the gun show loophole. They just set a license plate reader out there, and then everybody that goes in, they know everybody who's gone there. And if you just sit in the passenger seat of somebody else's car, you find somebody who's going to drive you, or maybe an Uber. Well, they're going to know the information who took that Uber. They also have facial recognition on some of them to know who the passengers are in these things. And then the local law enforcement, which is doing the dirty work, hands the information to the feds. Well, passage of Question 2 in New Hampshire now requires them to have the warrant based on probable cause before they even access any of this information. So if they can't access the data, or if they're banned from doing it, now I don't trust them to always follow it, but this is a foundational step forward. If they can't access the data, then they can't share it through information sharing environment or through fusion centers with Washington, D.C. So it creates this layer of difficulty for the surveillance state to continue on. And that's basically how Mike reported on as well. Passage of Q2 creates the foundation to limit state and local surveillance and minimize the amount of personal information collected and stored by state governments. By doing so, it would also impact federal surveillance programs that depend on state and local support. So 80% to 20% in New Hampshire. On Question 2, the right to privacy is a natural right. And there were a number of other things. We're getting really pretty much close to the end of the show today. There were a number of other things. I know a lot of people talked about Michigan being the 10th state to legalize marijuana for recreational purposes, along with California, Colorado, Oregon, Alaska, and on Massachusetts, Maine. And one thing that was pretty much ignored from all the reporting, at least that I've seen so far, is that they also legalized industrial hemp. And I'm just going to cover this quickly. This was proposal number 1. It legalized recreational marijuana, created this whole kind of licensing scheme that's going to come up, the regulation of it, kind of like alcohol, or maybe, I don't think you're going to have a card or anything like that. They'll have retail stores, but they're going to check IDs, and on and on. But industrial hemp will also be legal under state and local law. Industrial hemp does not have the THC. It is used for CBD. It is used for, I have hemp granola, hemp seeds. I feed my parrots. I feed my parents hemp oil because it's a high source of omega-3. People can make cars that run on hemp oil. They don't have to be as reliant on petroleum, for example. People make hempcrete homes. And people are doing this a lot. It's a pretty large industry already, in the hundreds of millions of dollars a year, going towards billions. But the United States is the world's #1 importer of raw industrial hemp because the federal government has made the plant illegal for decades, even though it has no THC. And where do we import it from? Well, China's #1. and Canada is number 2. So the next time someone talks about a trade imbalance with China, just mention industrial hemp. But a number of states are defying this. There are 17 now. Michigan makes it 18 states that are defying Washington, D.C. by legalizing industrial hemp for commercial purposes, even though the feds say you can only do it for research through a university. Now Michigan will be the 18th state that says you can legalize this for commercial purposes, for whatever purpose, despite federal law that says you cannot. So the Department of, the Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, Mike, in his research and in my report here, we both think that it's very likely that this department is going to try to muck up the works in Michigan. So we encourage people in Michigan, as soon as that proposition, the Proposal 1, goes into effect, I mean, it says it's legal. It doesn't say it's any legal based on licensing scheme at all. In fact, the law specifically says the department may issue regulations to promulgate rules on how it's going to happen. It does not require it. So legal status means it is legal immediately once it goes into effect. And people could start planting. I mean, it's the winter. I'm not sure if you can do that in Michigan, but maybe people with greenhouses could start moving things forward. And really the bottom line on all of this gets down to human action. Whatever a state may pass, if a state passes a law that says, we're nullifying all gun control laws, that's awesome. It doesn't happen because we have such great opposition from the NRA, Republican Party, Heritage Foundation, and other supposedly pro-gun rights organizations. But we're working very hard on it, step by step, to make this happen. But let's say a state passes a law to do that. If people don't actually go out and manufacture and buy and sell and own and use and keep and have their firearms without following federal law, following the state, or even not, even ignoring state laws. If people don't actually do things, if the market doesn't take action, nothing is null and void at all. The end result really is human action. And for those of you who are interested in a book, that's the title of a great book that you probably should read at some point in your life by Ludwig von Mises, called Human Action. With that, I'm going to stop my rambling. I'm trying to cover way too much today, and I was up really late last night. So I hope you found this really interesting, and I hope this quote of the day from the great David Crockett, not Davy, the great David Crockett, can give you a little smile after. This is basically something he said right after he lost his election in 1830. He says, "I would rather be beaten and be a man than to be elected and be a little puppy dog." So kudos to David Crockett, for having principles. That's what we continue to try to do here, probably not to any level that he did. And that's what we hope that you will continue to advocate for in all of your actions, is having strong principles. Even if it's not the full win, or even if it seems like a loss, standing on principles to me is a victory. So a reminder for those who may not have heard it earlier, I will not be doing a live show on Friday. I'm traveling to Dallas, Texas to speak at the Abbeville Institute's event on the state of the nullification movement. And so I will try to have another video available for you guys to watch, a short pre-produced video of a couple of minutes for Friday morning. If not, it'll be available over the weekend. And then I will be back again next week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. I really appreciate the super chat from Truth Trees. That's awesome. And everyone else who's been here leaving some comments in the live chat: Robert Sanderson, Matt Hugh, Woodsider, Justin Bayola, Mad Sci, Joseph Standridge, Dakota Keeler. Haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you. Thank you so much for spending some time today. I hope this was interesting, insightful. To me, it's very exciting. Some positive steps forward. We've got a lot yet to do. And we'll be covering more of what we plan on doing and what we need to do when we come back next week. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you again for joining me today.